Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 2021 edition of Dr. Jaspersoft. Glad to have everyone joining us today. Another deep technical dive into debugging Jaspersoft source code and tips and tricks on logging and how to see different things in Jaspersoft. Before I get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. As usual, I'd like to know what kind of topics you guys want us to present. So I'm going to kick off the monthly poll. Feel free to vote for the topics that you'd like. Again, I love it if you vote, but if you vote for every one of them, that doesn't really help me so much. So try to pick the ones that are important to you, that you want us to see us present in the future. So you should see that there on the poll now. And then also, if you have questions, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your window there and put your questions in the Q&A section. I'm flying solo today, it's just myself, so I will address all the questions once we get done with the actual presentation and the demo. So please put those questions in the Q&A section. More than happy to answer any questions as they come up. My name is Mike Bilkowitz, as usual, here with you again. Hope everyone had a great break, holiday break, and happy to be into 2021. I can't believe we're already halfway through January, believe it or not. So chugging right along. So let's just go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen here. So again, we're going to talk about debugging today, Jaspersoft source code. If you have any questions that come up after the session, or if you're watching this on YouTube and you have questions, you can always email us at drjaspersoft@tipco.com. I just want to get that out there. We'll repeat that, of course, at the end of the session as well. Let me get forward. Whoops, a little too fast there. So again, I'm Mike Belkowitz. I'm in the customer success team here at Jaspersoft, TIPCO Jaspersoft, and I spent a lot of time working with clients over the years. I know a lot of familiar names I see already on this list of folks I've worked with throughout the years. And one of the common things that we deal with when we're interacting with clients and customizing code or troubleshooting code or trying to do performance, engagements, is how to properly debug and actually figure out what's going on in the back end of our system. So we're going to get very deep into the weeds very quickly here. We're going to talk about logging in Jaspersoft. I'll do a brief little section on that with a quick demo. Then we jump into actual debugging of the Jaspersoft source code. I got a couple slides to talk about that stuff. Then I'll show you the demos, and then we'll kick into the Q&As and call it good. All right, so jumping right in, logging in Jaspersoft, we have a great mechanism built into place. We basically rely on Log4j to log things that happen on the server side. Those of you that have been around a while and use Jaspersoft probably are familiar with this, but there's a very easy way to log extra things in your log files. But anything you want to actually see in those log files, of course, has to be in the code. So you can add any class that you see in the Jaspersoft system to your logger, but if nothing was written, obviously, in the log, to actually output logs, then it's not going to help you a whole lot. So I'm going to show you a little bit on how you can actually modify some of the source code and add logging yourself if you wish. But there are two basic methods that we have to change the log levels of what you're actually seeing in your log files. The first one is to actually go into, and starting with 7.5.1, I believe, or 7.5, we moved to log4j 2. So there should be either a log4j2.properties file, or if you're in an older version, it's just log4j.properties. And you can actually open that file. That one actually defines all of the settings for all the logging mechanism that JRS uses. Okay, so it's all the properties in there. There are several things in there that you can tweak and change that I recommend. But this file is what determines where Jaspersoft is outputting its logs. By default, it actually outputs to both the quote console, which in most systems, if you're in a Unix or Linux system, is Catalina.out. If you're using Tomcat, it can be different based on what you're actually what your application server is. But then also it logs to the jasperserver.log file, which is located in your webinf/logs directory. By default, it is set up to roll that file based on size. When it gets to a certain size, it's 1 megabyte, I believe, is the default setting. It will roll the file automatically. I believe with our log4j2 settings, we started to default to the zip version, so it actually zips the file when it rolls it, but that can be tweaked and changed here as well. But we only set it by default to save one log file beyond the jasperserver.log file that you have. I recommend increasing that number to maybe 10 or so. That gives you a lot more history in there, and that's only 10 megabytes of space, so it's not like it's a lot of space, but it gets you a lot more logs. So if you want, when you first install Jaspersoft, or if you're already running, I recommend going into that log4j2.properties file. You'll see where the number of rolling files is set to 1. Just change that to 10 or whatever to your liking. And of course, restart your server, because anything you change in this properties file will have to, requires a restart of the server. You can also modify, and I didn't mention it in here, the actual log levels of various classes within Jaspersoft right in the log4j.properties file. That is not super useful, because again, you're debugging stuff on the fly and you want to change that and see right away what's happened there. But of course, it requires a restart of the server, so I never modify logs levels in the log4j2.properties file. I always go the other route, which is in the UI. Once your server is running, you can go to manage server settings and your log settings and add any class you want, and it will automatically start logging based on your settings that you choose there. Note that log settings option, or the server settings option, is actually only available to users who have the role super user assigned to them. So basically your super user account. And again, changes are reflected immediately as soon as you make a change in there. It's kind of like a hot deploy. You'll immediately see the difference on your log files, and I'll show you an example of that in a momentarily. Any changes you make in that on the UI actually persist through any server restarts as well. So it will supersede anything you've set in the log4j2.properties file. So if you have a level set to error level, in the log4j2.properties, but you change it to debug level on the UI, that will persist and actually take precedence over the properties file setting. So it's very easy to quickly add lots of logging to your system, which of course is really good, but it's also potentially really bad. I've been at several clients where they have set all of the settings to all the log output to debug. And while that's great for debugging, it's actually really bad for performance, because some of our logging is very verbose. And I have been at client sites where we've tailed their log file and seen it just constantly moving with tons of data in there. So you don't want to just enable everything to debug. Trust me, it will not be helpful. It'll be very hard to actually find what you're looking for. You need to be selective about what you're actually logging in the system. So before I jump into the demos, let's talk a little bit about debugging the actual Jaspersoft source code. All right, so the first step, if you want to debug our actual source code, is to download it. A lot of people don't realize this, but we are open source. Our source code is available. If you have a license and a login to our support site, when you go to the download section, I'll show you that in a moment, you can actually download the source code from our download site. It comes in a big, massive zip file, and it has all of the source, thousands of classes that make up our actual application, and I'll show you how I put that into Eclipse when I want to play with the actual source code. So we're going to ensure, once you do want to actually debug a specific class, you want to make sure that it's actually set as a source folder. Again, I'll walk you through that. And then there's a special flag that you want to do when you want to turn on, essentially, when you start Jaspersoft. If you want to actually do a debug and do a remote debug of our system, you have to start Jaspersoft with this flag called JPDA. All right, that's specific to Tomcat. There's a different setting for WebLogic, and I'll send you a link. I'll put a link in the resources folder slide to show you how to do that in WebLogic if you're using WebLogic. But what this does is it tells the JVM to allow remote debugging on port 8000 by default. That is configurable, but setting it to 8000 usually isn't an issue. And then in Eclipse, you'll set up a remote Java application and run it. Once you hit a breakpoint, you will be prompted to switch to your debug perspective, and that's when you get to step through the code, and that's that's where the fun begins. The same instructions apply if you have your own custom code. You just got to make sure you actually add the proper logging to your classes. And again, I will show you some of that. So let's just jump right in. All right, so I am logged in here to Jaspersoft with the super user account. So I have the role super user, and you can see here I've got manage server settings as an option, and the first thing that comes up is the log settings screen. So right here are a bunch of sort of basic classes that we feel are kind of common classes that you sometimes may want to log. And the nice thing is, though, there's this box here at the bottom that allows you to enter any class you want that's in the deployed system, that's in any of your jar files that's deployed. You can add that class here and change the drop down to whatever level, and it will instantly start logging that class. Just as an example, let me just show you. I'm running, of course, on a Windows machine here. And if I change one of these settings, this is one I almost never recommend you change because it's so verbose, but this hibernate.sql one, if I change this to debug, it immediately reloads the page, sets that level to debug, and you'll see now I've already got logs in my system. And this is a very, like I said, a very verbose logging. If I hit the home page, you see my log files going pretty crazy just to get to the home page. So that logs everything in there. I don't, again, recommend keeping that setting on very long if you ever want to use it, but that's a good example of how quick it actually changes. So I'm going to change that back to error and let the page reload. And now I'm back to the error log. So for this example, what I'm going to show you is I've got there's a base class. Oh, sorry. Before I jump into that, real quick, if you haven't seen this before, when you log into our support site, to get to the source code, if you go to the product downloads here, the e-delivery site, that's going to bring you over here. Let's just do it, and I'll show you. And once you get here, you can just search for Jaspersoft. And depending on which version you have access to, you might see different ones here. But in my case, I'm going to go to the Enterprise Edition. And if I click on that download here, you see all my different versions. I go to download. Now I can choose the version of the software that I want. Let's say I want 751. Choosing an OS isn't necessary for this. It's necessary on the page for validation, but you can choose any of them for this. Check the box. The important part is hitting this radio button here that says individual file download. Once you get there, you'll see the three different sort of packages that we have. The first one is the Jasper Reports server software, and in there's the zip file with the majority of our source code right here, and it's got the SRC extension there. There also is the library software, which makes up some of the back-end systems that we use. And it doesn't say source, but this zip file is also a good one to download and put into your Eclipse later. That way you'll have all of the code that is actually being accessed within Jaspersoft. There also is the source here for Studio. That's definitely not for the faint of heart. If you're really interested in that, it's there for you. I'm not going to be talking about that here because it's pretty rare to be changing the source code for Jaspersoft Studio. All right, so now I've got that source. I'm going to go over to my Eclipse here and show you what I've done. What I do is I take that zip file, I unzip it, and I basically just move that zip file, the contents of the zip file, into a project that I've created here in Eclipse. And you see here, I've got a Jasper source 751. I've got a Jasper source 750. I'll have multiple versions in my real workspace. But you'll see all of those folders just show up as regular folders, and that's fine for for just searching and looking at the source code. But when you want to actually debug that source code, it gets a little bit more complex. But one thing I wanted to show was I know that I'm playing with SSO, right? This is my hypothetical now, and I want to jump in and actually look, and I can see here, oh, look at this. There's a bunch of logging that's actually happening in this particular class. So to log that information, it's not going to be logged by default because everything is set at the error level. And you notice these are debug statements. So what I need to do is grab the fully qualified class name of this guy, which includes the package. So I'm going to grab that package, and I'm going to go back over to my log settings here, and I'm going to paste that in here, put a dot, and then I'm going to grab the class name and paste that here. And now that's one step. Don't forget to actually change the dropdown. It's set to error by default. You definitely want to change it to another level. In this case, we're going to go to debug. You see it added it here. It doesn't always add it to the end. In fact, it rarely adds it to the end, but you can always tell the stuff you've added because there's no comments on the left here. So the one I added is right here, and it's set to debug now. So now if I hit that class, I can actually see the log statements on the back end. All right, so this is a little bit complicated there with all that Hibernate stuff in there, but just for grins, I'm going to go ahead and force a hit of that class. And to do that, I'm going to actually hit my SSO because that's what that code reflects. And it's the creation of the organization in an SSO, a pre-authenticated token. So I'm passing in a token here, and I'm going to create an org called test org. I know it's a little hard to read here with the URL encoded URL, but it's right here, the O equals test org. So I'm going to hit enter. And you'll see here, there's my 3 log statements for that class. So they actually got logged now right here on the system. And you can see the last one shows the actual tenant ID that came across was test org. So I know that actually worked. And it hit it nice and quick, but it's being very slow to actually process. Oh, because I have my debugger running, and that's why. Or I don't. All right, I'm not sure why that's there. It goes. All right, just took a little while, a little slow today. So that's the user I was in, and it actually created an organization called test org, and that code that I added to the logger is what actually did the work to create this organization. So that's how you simply add stuff to your log settings there. So I'm going to log back in as super user and show you one more thing before we jump on to the next part of the demo. When you are in here, sometimes people ask, well, how do I get rid of these things? Well, obviously you can just set this back down to the error level, and that's fine. That's an easy enough way to do it, and it'll still be there if you ever want to come back to it later. But if you really want to clear it out of here and get it out of here, there's no delete button or anything like that here. You actually have to go over to this restore default setting, and you see here on the left. So if I click on that restore defaults, it'll actually show me the things that I've changed since I've been messing with my system. Now, obviously the Hibernate SQL shows up, but it's actually back to its default, but I can just hit this delete button. And now that setting got to hit save. Now that setting that I added, that package that I added is no longer there, and it's just gone completely from this screen. All right. Okay, so now let's move on to the actual source code, the fun stuff. So now I'm in Eclipse. You can see I've got a bunch of classes here, and like I said, one thing, if you really want to actually debug this, the first thing you're going to want to do is make sure that when you start your server, you actually set that setting, that JPDA flag. So in my case, I'm on a Windows box. I'm not running this as a service. So it's quite simple. I just actually run the catalina.bat file, and pass the start command. But you see here, I know it's probably a little small. I've added the flag JPDA right here, and that tells Tomcat to listen on port 8000 for remote debugging sessions. So once I start that way, what you will see, the difference you'll see is at the very beginning of your startup here, you'll see a listening for transport at address 8000. That's how you know it's actually working. And then to really verify it, if you go into your Eclipse, you can now set up the debugging here. But before we do that, I want to show you what you have to do with the class. So you'll see here, I've got, I have, if I can find it, the class that I was just looking at, that MT external tenant setup processor class, this guy right here, is actually set as a source folder here. So I found that class within that code that we had done before. I right-clicked at the main Java level and said use as source. So if there's a class in here that I want to use as the source, you see here I've got a bunch of classes in this guy, in this TIBCO maps, let's say, you know, and all these classes are in here. If I just keep expanding, so if I want to debug something in this section, then I go up to where the COM starts, where the package starts, right, one level above it. I right-click, I say build path, and I say use as source folder. That will transfer it from just a normal folder in Eclipse to an actual source folder here, which will then allow me to add breakpoints and do that fun stuff here. So if you look at this particular guy, I've actually added already a breakpoint here. Process is the first method that gets executed in this particular class. So I put a breakpoint, and then I can hopefully step through this code once I've got the debugger connected. So once that, as I mentioned, once you started up your server with that 8,000, you know, listening on port 8,000 with the JPDA flag, you can now come in here and set up a debugger, a remote application debugger on this project. And to do that, there's a little icon up here that says debug. When you first do this, you're not going to see anything in these top ones. You're just going to see these three options. I've already done these ones, so they're already there. But if I go to debug configurations, and then in this screen, I will be on remote Java application. All I have to do is hit the new launch configuration here, and it will create a Java application, a remote Java application connection right here, just like these two. And it's going to point to the project you're on right now. If it's not, just make sure you're choosing the correct project where your source code is. And it's going to default to localhost and port 8,000. Obviously, if your server is on a different machine, you'll want to change this host to whatever machine it's on. And if you've changed the port, you can set that port here. So then once I apply that, I simply hit debug in this screen. And now I'm in debug mode. If I click on the debug perspective over here, this little bug, if this connects, you will see a bunch of threads here, just like this. That's how you know it's actually connected. If for some reason you don't have the JPDA flag set, this will not show a connection here. It'll say disconnected. That's how you know that you, oh wait, I need to go restart the server with the JPDA flag if I want to set it up. So now that I'm in here, like I said, I've got that breakpoint set. So now that I'm actually in debug mode, we're going to go back over here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually going to reset that organization. I'm just going to delete it to ensure that we get into that same code. We should get there either way, but I'm going to go ahead and delete it just to start fresh. That's the beauty of the pre-auth SSO. It's very quick to recreate this stuff. Maybe not so quick today. All right, so that guy's gone. I'm going to log out. I'm going to grab one of my encoded URLs again for SSO and paste that here. And now when I hit it, you'll notice my Eclipse highlighted right away. And sometimes you'll miss that. You'll be like, what am I waiting for? What am I waiting for? Just like I was earlier, I thought maybe that's the reason. If I click on this guy right here, you will see it's actually gotten to my breakpoint already. So it's highlighted the line I'm on, it's at the breakpoint, and now I can do whatever I want. I can check variables. I can look in here and try to, look at various variables that are available at this scope level of the software. I can look at all my breakpoints. I can actually add expressions if you want. You see, I've got some here from previous times I've troubleshot code, but I could always add various expressions if I want to see what they are and kind of watch them. And the important thing is to be able to step through. So if I use these buttons up here, hitting play will skip forward to the next breakpoint if there is one. But the important ones, I think, are these three here where I can step over. And you see I stepped over that first class. I'm going to step over this next class. You're going to see here, there's my log statement. It's not actually going to log because I disabled the logging in this case. But it gets all this information. You see now tenant ID was updated. And if we keep going, we're going to see this tenant ID, boom. Now you see here, it actually grabbed the value test.org from my URL. So I can step through and do whatever I want. I can go ahead and hit play and that will resume. And then that will allow the system to continue normal processing. And again, it's being a little slow today, but basically Oh, you can see I've hit another breakpoint. Looks like I had a different class completely in there. So sometimes you just got to hit play a few times. Yeah, because I was going to show you something else. So you'll see that breakpoint hit here in a minute. And yeah, of course, you know, the perils of live demos. For some reason, it is slow today in creating the organizations and users. Usually this happens much faster, I promise. But once that's in, that'll go through just the normal way. There it goes. And we're forward now and, you know, back into the system where we were before. Now, the same thing applies, like I said, to your own custom source. In this particular case, I'm going to switch back to the Java perspective and just show you one last thing. I've got a custom version of a class that creates user folders, this external user folder processor, which it's customized from our base one. So what I've done is I found the base class, I actually copied into my own package here. So this custom SSO package. And I've added a slight customization here. There's actually a bunch of customizations, but the important one is, in this particular case, we set some user permissions a little bit different than the base system does. So that's actually done right here in this code. And then I just take this guy, I create a jar file, I deploy it to the server. If you're curious about customizations, you can watch our November session on YouTube, because I actually talked about how to do this kind of stuff back then. And but if I want to actually track this stuff, then I can go ahead and debug this as well. But it's a different package now. I'm sorry, different project. So what I need to do is set up that project, the debug configuration, to point to my custom guy as well. Same way I did the other one. I go in here, you'll see I've already got it in this case, but it now points to a different project to point to that code there. Now, if you wanted to do both Jasper code and your own custom code, you either put your custom code in the Jasper project, or you put the Jasper code in your project with the same package name, of course, and that should allow you to debug both at the same time. So this guy, I'm going to go ahead and hit debug. So now I'm in debug mode here. Oh, failed to connect. Oh, because I did not connect my previous one. So I was still connected here with my Jasper source Java app. So if I right click this guy, I can just say disconnect. I don't want to be connected anymore. That's good. Now I'm going to go in and choose the custom SSO one, and it's made the reconnection now pointing to the custom SSO project. So that class should also get hit whenever I go in here. So once again, you know what? I will actually just do this with a different user. How's that? And so I'm going to do test user. We'll call this test user 7. And what that code does is it actually creates a custom folder for the user who is being logged in and authenticated. So I hit that, and boom, I've already got my my breakpoint got hit. It actually went to my external tenant setup processor. It's still processing that breakpoint, but if I hit play, now I'm in my custom code here. And in the custom code, I can actually jump through and I can see, oh, here's where it checks to see if the folder already exists. This is a new user, so clearly the folder does not exist. So it went ahead and now it's going to jump into create user folder. I hit play, it's going to jump to my next breakpoint, which was in that create user folder method. And of course, I can jump through here. You can see the folder object that's being created. There's the name, the label, and the name is test user 7. It's got a description of default user folder that's actually set right here in the previous line. So there's all this stuff is happening here. I can go forward. And then, of course, I see this is where it's now setting the permissions and adjusting the permissions of that folder per my client needs. And that's it. That's the very quick version. I'm already at the bottom of the hour of how to debug source code in Jaspersoft. I hope I didn't go too quick. Let's see if we've got any questions. We do have one question so far. So if anyone else has questions, please feel free to add them now. And also, before anyone leaves, if you haven't already voted on the poll, please do that and make sure that we get your preferences in for future sessions. Would be much appreciated. And let's take a look at the question. Okay, so hey Mark, how's it going? Setting logging levels for a chosen class without restarting looks cool. Can we put that feature into our own web app? Can it be found in the Jasper open source code? That's a good question, Mark. Yeah, absolutely, you can do that. How that mechanism works, I'll be honest, I'm not 100% sure how we got that to work. I think there's some sort of listener built into place in the application that page is sending a signal to update those settings. Honestly, I have no idea how that is being done for sure. I can definitely research that. Contact me, Mark. You have my info. If you want me to look into that a little further for you, we can definitely figure out how we're actually doing it. But yeah, I'm not sure off the top of my head how is specifically to do it. I believe, like I said, there's some sort of listener that triggers that off there. So I answered that one live. All right. Any other questions? I don't see anyone else right now. Just make sure I'm not missing anything. No one in the chat window. Well, that's all I have then, folks. Let me stop sharing and just show you. Oh, actually, sorry, I do need to share. Let's go back here. Of course, I should make a plug for our next session. It looks like the session, it might change, but as of right now, the plan is to talk about creating domain security files. That will be the second Thursday of February, which is February 11th. So please, please, please keep an eye out for that. You should get the invites, a week or so before that session. So if you're interested in domain security files, I believe that's going to be our next topic. The registration will be up hopefully soon on the webpage for you to register. And then also we have the resources here. I'm going to post this stuff on the Dr. Jaspersoft community page, which you see right here. If you just search for Dr. Jaspersoft, usually it comes right up. In that page, sometime today, I will post the PDF version of this presentation. Got some of the links here, including how to do the remote debugging in both Tomcat and WebLogic, like I mentioned, if you've got WebLogic systems, and also the building custom code in Eclipse, which kind of walks through in a little bit more detail what I quickly showed you today. Once you get that source code and putting the custom code actually in there into a project and setting that side up. So those resources will be available to you there. And with that, again, one more check, no more questions. I think we're going to call it. Thank you guys very, very much for attending. I really appreciate your support as usual. And hopefully we'll see you again next month. All right. Thanks, everyone.